All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast. And have we got a very special episode for you today? A very special guest who's going to talk to you about how he's invested for a long period of time. Also, why investing is like building farms, not turning up at the casino. And also, why great investors don't need to be champions. Ben, what else are we going to learn?
Bryce, we are going to learn about this whole concept of history and how it repeats itself. And as investors, tell you what, that history is really good stuff. And also, Bryce, what are the 3 F's? What is the success of happiness? What does that look like? We're going to learn about that as well today.
3 F's, Ben. What are they? Well, you better stick around, folks, to find out. Let's rip into the show.
Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to 2 of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance, and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast. And Ben, welcome back to you too, mate. How are you?
Mate, I'm, obviously surprised with the decision from the RBA. We'll talk about that later. But let's talk about the great escape, shall we, Bryce?
That's what I thought you were going to be surprised about, Ben. That's what I thought you were going to be surprised about. But we can indulge you for 2 reasons. One, we got a very special guest today who is also a Collingwood supporter, so it's kind of in the right theme. But go on, mate. Let us know about the Great Escape. We're all waiting with bated breath to hear the update.
Well, even though the tides were against us, Bryce, we were rowing against the tide. And yeah, it was a great result. We were it's just lovely to watch. What a team. What a team.
Mate. Mindset's great because what it's done to the other teams is said, if you are not leading by 50 points at 3/4 time, we're coming for you.
Exactly.
Which is
love it.
Good mindset stuff, mate. Very good.
It is very true. But thank you for allowing me to indulge. Well done, Pies. Keep up the good work.
Mate, it's always good to banter with you, mate. But as soon as you start going, and our back line was really great and the forwards, that's the bit where everyone's ears start bleeding. So well played by you, mate, by keeping it humble at the top level, which is good.
Well, I've got some other exciting news to share, right? Obviously, just in the last week, we've also released a brand new dashboard, the expense dashboard, on the Moorr mobile version. So, Bryce, do you want to know where all your money goes?
I do, mate.
Guess what?
Well, actually, I know where it goes, mate. I just log into Moorr and I've got it all there now.
Yes, I know. It's a great little new feature. Lots of little fun tools attached to it. So you can see a consolidation of each of your expense items in their categories. You can also look at the card features underneath that. You can group them up. So if you haven't already jumped into Moorr, here's another great reason to also check it out and put your numbers in there and get these really interesting insights, especially obviously when more and more attention is being paid to outgoings and the flow of money out, thanks to obviously the Reserve Bank's decision this week as well.
Perfect timing, Ben. And just for those on mobile, you're talking about desktop, not yet, but that's coming very, very soon. You hinted at RBA. We're going to talk about that in What's Making Property News, so stick around for that, folks. But yeah, definitely for those of you on the Moorr app, check that feature out. It's really cool. And as Ben said, in the current environment, it's amazing. And for those of you who haven't, moorr.com.au, and you spell Moorr with 2 O's and 2 R's, Ben, moorr.com.au. Go and download it and check it out, which is really cool. Hey, I want to do a quick shout out, Ben. At the beginning of the year, you will remember around February, you and I come back from Summer Series and we say, folks, if you love those stories, now is the time to set a place marker so that when we do the call out at the end of the year, you can come on and share your story. So I just want to do a almost mid-year check-in. I know I'm a little early, Ben, but I just want to shout out to anyone, but we're still coming for Summer Series and we still want to hear about your transformation stories. And if you are sort of in that messy middle, please lean in. Get the job done, tidy it up, work out essential and discretionary, make sure you get the money smart sorted, make sure you got a plan, make sure you get that sorted because you've still got lots of time left before the end of the year. So I just want to encourage those folks. I'm definitely going to have that call out and we'd love to share those stories. And also, sooner rather than later, Ben, we're going to do a couple of winter series. So I'm putting the shout out now. Anyone who wants to be part of our winter series, Ben, with particular attention by me and you around anyone who has a story about navigating the duress of expenses. What have you done? What were the things that you did when the interest rates started rising? What like Brendan last week, I spoke to Brendan during the week and he said that was a great way to share the story with the community. Can you relate to the Diderot effect? Is there something that you've done that you think that the audience would benefit from in an environment of high interest rates? We want to hear from you. That shout out is coming very, very shortly. And Ben, I want to lean in on that. If you're feeling right now a little bit in your stomach where you think, oh, I'd love to put my hand up, but I've got a few little butterflies, that is normal. We will look out for you. And if you do have that feeling, I reckon you should put your hand up because I reckon there's probably something in it.
Yeah, it's about obviously always being consistent, building those habits up, and if there's some fine tuning to do. In fact, Bryce, I'd be saying right about now is a great time to go back into Moorr and check in on your wealth speed. Now, for those who are using Money Smarts inside Moorr and you're doing your monthly checkups, your wealth speed is automatically getting adjusted. But if it's really clear, the quicker that wealth speed goes is the quicker you're going to get to your destination. So if you haven't done it over the last quarter, go in and update your numbers. Obviously, you know that if you've got mortgages, you're going to get a little bit extra in repayments that are coming through. Put those numbers in and you will see your updated insights in regards to your wealth clock and also your wealth speed.
There you go, folks. More update. Summer series is about 4, 5, 6 months away. Winter series is imminent. Put your hand up. Let us know. Just go to the website, info@thepropertycouch.com.au. Just let us know. Put your hand up. We'll do the rest and we'll take it super gentle on you because we understand there's a whole heap of vulnerability around that. So if you haven't listened to any of our winter series in the past or summer series, we take great care and we consider it a great privilege when someone puts their hand up to do it. So if you feel like that's you, please let us know. Hey, Ben, I hinted earlier that we've got a special guest today. He's a Collingwood supporter. We didn't hold that against him. So we're excited today because it's a little deviation from our lane because we're talking to someone who's achieved an enormous amount of success in the share market. Recently written a book. I found the book fascinating, and what I loved about it, it was a timeless evergreen book around principles of investing that you could equally apply to the share market as you could to the property market. And the exciting part about it, Ben, is we've got someone who has been in the game for a long time, and that's investing for a long time. And you and I both love talking to people who've done it for multi-decades, multi-cycles. So stick around for that. We've got a lot to cover. Before we get there, Ben, I'm going to do my Mindset Minute theme today, which is because we're talking about investing in the share market, who else would you go to for a quote, Ben, other than Uncle Warren? So he says, to invest successfully over a lifetime does not require a stratospheric IQ, unusual business insights, or inside information, right? So that's Warren Buffett, clearly. So that is the theme of today. That is the theme of the conversation that we're about to have today. I want you to let that land. The topic of the podcast today was why great investors don't need to be champions. We're going to show you why great investors don't need to be champions and what that looks like. So we're going to have a really great conversation today. So basically what Warren's saying is a long-term investment strategy that focuses on fundamentals, diversification, risk management, and patience can be more important than IQ or business acumen. So we've been preaching that now, Ben, for 8 years. We've got an external guest to talk about that. But Ben, before we go to the conversation we had, it was a good chat, wasn't it? It was good to have the contrast between the vehicle, but then to get up to 30,000 feet and just have a conversation about principles that apply universally.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I took a lot out of, I could relate quite a lot to Mike because I'm on that same journey. I'm probably 10 years behind him, but over 30 years of investing, I've certainly, taken a lot of information together, and I'll summarise at the end of the sit down that we had with Mike around what that looks like. But it just highlights to me, Bryce, and look, Mike's highly intelligent. You'll see that come through. He's well read, very, very investigative way in which he looks at things and forms his views on the world. And so I think, that is also some takeaways there, that he hasn't left it to chance, but most importantly, he's taken action, but he's sharing his knowledge with you in terms of how he synthesized all that down to some really basic understanding, and you don't have to be a champion to understand it.
Love it. Mike is a student of history. You will get that. So the way that we framed up this conversation is we talked about his backstory. We talked about you will hear a whole bunch of anecdotes about how Mike delves into history and quotes a lot of historical figures and how their view on investing in markets. I think you'll enjoy that, but make sure you stick around to the end because we bring it all together. There's a lot of concepts. There's the metaphor that we use, which I think is really beautiful. How we bring it all together and have a really great conversation with Mike in studio, on the couch, which was a lot of fun for you and I, and hopefully for Mike as well. But Ben, let's cut to the conversation now that you and I recently had with Mike Kemp. All right, Ben, today we've got a very special guest. We are talking with Michael Kemp. Dr. Michael Kemp completed an MBA from Monash University before embarking on a stellar career in corporate finance during the mid-80s bull market, then switching to a career as a preeminent periodontist running a successful practice in Brighton, Victoria for almost 20 years. Throughout both these careers, Michael maintained a fascination for the share market. As well as managing his own portfolio, he spent a lifetime reading and researching to find out what works and what doesn't and what it takes to become a successful investor. He shared some of his thinking in his first book, Creating Wealth, in 2010, which was followed by Uncommon Sense in 2015. By this time, Michael's work had attracted attention in the US, with Robert P. Miles, author of The Warren Buffett CEO, inviting Michael in 2015 to address fund managers and investors from around the world at the annual Value Investor Conference, which precedes the Berkshire Hathaway AGM in Omaha, Nebraska. We'll talk about that shortly. From 2011 to 2020, Michael was the Chief Investment Analyst for Scott Pape's Barefoot Blueprint newsletter. Today he spends time with his family and friends, travelling, investing on his personal account, writing articles and recording podcasts for a business consultancy firm. To Michael, finance has always been a passion, never a job. Welcome to the Property Couch, Michael.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here.
It's quite an impressive CV, which is plenty of angles.
It's a bit confused, isn't it?
Well, how many people could say they can go from being a dentist to going and speaking in Omaha, Nebraska, which we'll dive into shortly. But before we get there, can you tell us what it was like growing up, the conversations that you had over the dinner table about money, if there were any?
Sure, like every kid, every child, I'm sure you think your family life is quite normal. You don't think there's anything unusual about it, but people have asked me that before, and when I started thinking about it, it probably was a bit unusual. I grew up in a very affluent suburb in Melbourne, but we weren't affluent people. It was a strange situation. My parents' marriage broke up when I was 4 years old. We owned our house in this suburb, and my father left, leaving a single mum with 4 kids, and she, to her credit, she went out and got a job. She was a great believer in you look after yourself in this world, so there was no, social security, Centrelink or whatever. So when I turned 5, she went out and got a job, and necessarily I grew up in a very independent way. I used to get myself to school and back from 5 years old. My mother, because we didn't have a lot of money, she made $1 go a long, long way. If I wanted something, I had to get it, and I was taught that. I mean, a perfect example, when I was 8, I wanted a bike. Well, she came home from the supermarket with an entry for a colouring competition. And the prize...
The prize was the bike.
The prize was the bike. There was 20 bikes Australia-wide given to kids for this. My friend said, no one ever wins them. Anyway, I got a bike.
You won it.
Yeah, and when I was 11, I decided I wanted some money. Well, my mother couldn't give me any, so I got a paper round. So I used to get up at 6 every morning and do this paper round 6 days a week before I went to school, Monday to Friday. And here's the crazy thing, when I think about it now, rather than spending all that money that I was earning, as much as it was when you were 11 years old, I remember buying a corporate debenture.
Of course.
I mean, what 11-year-old buys a corporate debenture?
Did you do that, Ben?
I didn't know about corporate debentures.
Well, I was reading the paper and it saw this company needed money, and you send in your money. Of course, I didn't even have a check account. I had to go down and get myself what was called a money order.
Yes.
And I stuck it in an envelope with the this thing. I didn't do a credit check on the company. I don't know if it was a good risk or not, but I got my money back. So, but as far as conversations around the table, well, I do remember my mother, who was English. She married an Australian airman during the war, just as soon as the war finished. So she was English. She came out and lived in Australia. She had this saying about the never never. People buying things on the never never. And that was British slang or English slang for putting things on credit, lay-by.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, you know, they couldn't afford something, so they put it on the never never, make the payments. By the time they'd eventually paid it off, they'd paid 2 or 3 times what it was actually worth. The thing was worn out, so they went out and did it again. So they spent their life on this cycle. She was condemning of the never never, a condemning of people borrowing to buy consumption items, discretionary items. Mm. So I grew up knowing that if you wanted something, you saved up for it. The other influence on my life, I think, was my grandfather. And I was saying to you, it was interesting that Evan Lucas was talking to you about the influence that his grandfather had on him. And my grandfather, who was English, he retired in the late 60s. And interestingly, I'm wearing his watch today. He got given this for 50 years service in his job with Western Union. He was a telegraph operator. He started there when he was a kid during the First World War. The thing I learnt from my grandfather was pure observation. He died with $10,000. He never owned a car, never had his licence, never owned a house, rented all his life. And he was one of the happiest blokes I ever saw. And he gained his strength and his happiness from human relationships. And that really taught me that in life, that it's not all about money, it's about doing what matters, and what matters is not about money. But money can serve you well. If you live in Australia, you probably need it. Yeah. So they were the lessons I learned as a young fella.
Now, Mike, in terms of growing up with 3 other siblings,
mm-hmm.
how many of your siblings have the same behaviour traits as what you developed in growing up? So where were you in the pecking order?
I was last.
You were the last one.
My sister was
the oldest?
Yeah, she was the oldest.
And have they also gone on to have the same sort of level of behavioural discipline and the similar sort of traits?
I'd say so. No, they didn't pursue a finance-based sort of career. But the funny thing is, my brother, oldest brother, who we thought was the spendthrift, amongst his peer group, they used to laugh about the fact that he wasn't. He only discovered that when, as an adult, that he was mixing with other people, that he wasn't a spendthrift at all. The simple answer to your question is yes.
Yeah, good. That's good, because normally even under the same roof, there can be different disciplines or observations that are taken.
We all had respect for my mother. She was a very intelligent,
amazing.
Very intelligent woman and hard-working woman. When I look back.
So clearly, it was observational then from your mum then? There wasn't direct conversations that you were having? She saw that she was prepared to work hard, do what it takes for you? And
she set the example.
So it was all...
And her law was an unwritten law. You didn't defy her. Mm-hmm. She made us independent.
So what about budgeting and what were you observing? So lots of observations from your mum. She obviously was stoic in her demeanour and in making sure that you guys were okay. What about when you got your first job and then you had a form of independence? What experiences were you drawing on to make sure that, what did you do with your money? Did you spend it? Did you save it? Did you budget? The
first thing I did with my money as an adult was buy a house. I bought 2 properties within the first year of starting to work at a full-blown wage. I bought 2 properties that year, one to live in, one as an investment. And I started getting really serious about investing, I guess, when I was in the 30s. And I tended towards the stock market. It's something that appealed to me. It was hands-off in the sense that other people were managing my businesses for me. So I did err towards stock market. And that's where my career took off. I worked in corporate finance. I worked for Bankers Trust. I worked for Potter Warburg. So it was just a natural attraction to want to invest in shares.
So you hinted at the corporate finance. So take us through the early stage. Your first sort of professional role. What was that, and what was, because there's an interesting evolution in your careers that sort of leads you to this point. So
I wanted to work for myself, and I was very good at science. So people said you have to be a doctor, but I didn't want to be a doctor, so I became a dentist instead. I thought that was a surefire way to work for yourself. There was just one problem. I wasn't particularly passionate about dentistry. And I realised early on in my practicing career that I really wanted to be in business. So I did an MBA, and I remember a lecture on corporate finance. I walked up to the lecturer at the end of the lecture and said, "Hey, do people actually have jobs doing this stuff?" He goes, "Yeah, it's called corporate finance." So that's when I knew I wanted to do it. And I found myself I was just passionate about it. I just loved it. I just absolutely adored the job. And it wasn't about the money, it was about the intellectual. And that's the same with finance and investing in stocks. It's not about making the money, although that helps. It's about the intellectual. I love the fact it's about philosophy, psychology. I love the history, the mathematics, the accounting. Investing for me is just so diverse. I love history, and I'm fascinated with financial history as well.
What's clear from reading the book is that you are very well read, and from a very wide breadth of time is some of the resources that you're pulling from to pull together the ideas within the book.
Stock market first commenced 1602 with the Dutch East India Company, so we've got over 400 years of history to draw from. It's all been documented. The earliest investing book I've got is Joseph de la Vega's book, Confusion to Confusions, which is about his time trading on the Amsterdam Exchange. It was written in 1688. I mean, he wrote it in Spanish, but it's been converted to English. And I've read many, 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 many books from the period of about the late 1700s through to today. And the fascinating thing is the message is essentially unchanged. Which is?
What's the secret? Oh, we know what you're saying in the book.
We'll get to that. So you've gone from corporate finance to dentistry.
I bounced to and fro. It was like a seesaw, you know. They just got mashed up like that. Let's not do a chronological one on this one because it's really messy.
So there's just this breadth and variety of what you've done, in terms of corporate finance, dentistry, periodontics, and then working with Scott Pape with his newsletter. So there's a fair bit involved in that career, which is, for some people, there's 3 lifetimes in that.
Yeah, I think so. I got to the stage, my brother died at 48. So I had decided to retire at 48. And I was just about there, and Scott contacted me. And he said, "Hey, I'd like you to come and work with me." So that kicked my retirement. Well, I wasn't working with him. I just loved it.
It wasn't work.
It wasn't work.
It was a love
It wasn't
job.
work, and I sort of hadn't worked out what I was going to do with my retirement anyway. So he just came along at the perfect time. So yeah, but he wanted me to work for him as an investment analyst, and that just appealed to me too enormously.
So it kind of plays into that. You find something you love, you don't work a day.
No,
Exactly.
no, I don't do anything I don't want to do. I haven't done it for a long, long time.
Well, as a segue then, what does wealth mean to you then?
Exactly what we're just saying. Friends, family, freedom. The ability, and money means all those 3 things. You can spend time with friends if you don't have to go to work for ridiculous amounts of hours. You can spend time with your family for the same reason. And freedom means that you're waking up in the morning and you don't have a financial burden where someone's forcing you, not with handcuffs, but if you're heavily in debt, you're forced to go to work, even if you don't like your job. So that's what money is to me. I was really intrigued when I started reading the philosopher Epicurus. He was around about 300 years before Jesus Christ was a boy, so a long time back. And these concepts of financial freedom and so forth, and friends and family, he was talking about then. There's nothing new about this. I mean, I think the fascinating thing about Epicurus was that he was an Athenian, he lived in Athens, and he bought a big house just out of town, a big house, and invited all his friends to come and live with him. Because he knew that if he was surrounded by friends, he couldn't be unhappy. And I sort of picked up on that. I've got a place down the coast, down the surf coast, and there's an open door policy for my friends. I've even said to them, you want a key? No, we'll only go down here with it when you're there. Well, okay, I'm glad of that because I want them to be there when I'm there. And I remember about 18 months ago I was down there, there were 9 of us there. My son was included. We just had a ball. How can you have a bad time when you're laughing? And I think one of the qualities of a true friend is you just laugh with them. How can you be unhappy when you're laughing? Family. I think the qualities in a family that are important are love. I fortunately married a beautiful woman who has Italian heritage, and they embrace family. And I've just stood back in awe and learnt from her. You probably picked up my early life was a little bit austere, a little bit independent, but she embraces family, and I absolutely love that. And freedom. Money to me is a pool of capital, and it's not for purchasing things. I don't think you get much enjoyment out of owning things. In fact, there's another one that my mother said to me, the more things you own, the more complicated your life is. So I like to keep life simple. So I mean, there's a lot of things I could buy that I choose not to. To me, it's a source of capital that delivers an income, much as a harvest from a farm, and I live off that income. I know it's never going to expire, run out. So it gives me autonomy. And I think that was a word that Evan Lucas used in the podcast with you, financial autonomy. It's just a beautiful thing. But it doesn't mean that it gives you the ability to do nothing. I think it was Warren Buffett who said in 1986, he said, I'll give my children enough money that they can do anything they want, but not so much as they do nothing. Mm-hmm. And I think that you should employ that philosophy with yourself. Develop a pool of money that delivers you enough or more than enough than you need. Spend only what you need and look for things in life that give you pleasure besides the material things, because I think they're an absolute waste of time, personally.
How do you mentor people in that concept? Because it's such a powerful concept. The amount of people who said that they've chased the money, once they got the money, left them with an empty feeling they didn't realise it, right? Yeah. So how do you mentor people? Because experience is that thing you get 2 minutes after you need it. So people go, oh yeah, money isn't everything, but I'll let you know when I get there and I'll decide for myself. So how do you drill in on that point for people who haven't experienced the financial freedom that you're talking about, for them to actually get that to land? Because Ben and I have spent some time on this podcast trying to remind folks that it's about experiences, not things. But it's one of those things that until you've actually got to that part of the mountain and realise it for yourself, a lot of people keep chasing it and that fundamental principle doesn't land. I mean, it's refreshing to hear you say that it's not about shiny things for you, but for a lot of people, it's hard for that message to get across.
For me, it came from reading. For me, it came from exploring the experience of people that came before me. I mentioned Epicurus. The message is as true now as it was 2,500 years ago. These are wise people. I have always enjoyed reading the lives of people who claim to be happy or say that they're happy, and there's a common thread through there, that it is not about things. And I internalised it and I believed it. And once I believed it and started living it, I realised how true it was. To me, spending money, I spend money on experiences. I'll tell you what I spend money on, and I do spend a lot of money. I get enormous satisfaction from helping friends who are in financial trouble. Not because they've done something stupid or blown it on the horses or this or that, but they're in genuine need. Someone who's about to get evicted from their house, done that. it's enormously powerful when you ring up the bank and they tell you that the marshal is arriving on Friday to remove the furniture. I'm getting a bit emotional about this because it really, it was a moment in my life I just loved. To ring up the bank and the guy who had ordered the marshal to get their stuff onto the garden that Friday said, "You're too late, mate." I said, "I'm not too late. You're not interested in owning a house. You're interested in getting your money. Put me onto your superior." And I said, what's this going to take? They said, "Bank check today." So I paid off their mortgage for them. Friends who have got a sick child, friends who are going to get evicted from their rental, my family spending holidays. I've got 2 adult kids who still come on holiday with us, and we just love that. You know, maybe the fact I'm picking up the airfares and the accommodation helps, but I'd like to believe that it's because they still want to spend time with us. Making sure that our kids, my 2 kids, live close to us, because there's nothing better than them being able to walk around to sea or to jump on the train or to, you know, they're important things. You know, it's not because my kids feel entitled. Neither of them do. They're lovely kids. I see them how hard, particularly one of them, works. But if you can help them in a way that doesn't feed a sense of entitlement. So I think you've got to judge your kids first. You don't want your kids growing up with that expectation. You want to see them work for something. But if it benefits all parties, then it's just a wonderful, wonderful feeling to have the money to be able to do that.
But Mike, it wasn't always that way, right? I mean, ultimately, you've been able to accumulate wealth over a longer period of time, and you've got a couple of principles, clean, simple principles in there, like discipline and patience and those type of things in the book. So for those people who, back to Bryce's question around...
They sound contradictory, don't they?
Well, they sort of do, but it is all about time, right?
Yeah.
That you've been able to accumulate that amount, because I relate very, very, very much to what the story that you're telling. Like I get great joy in helping family, friends and loved ones too with, you know, the same sort of exercise that you were just talking about. But to know how much and whether you've got enough, and you talk a lot about delayed gratification and all of those types of things, because you've been anchored, this beautiful story about following your passion, following your interest, and then turning that interest into a really lovely outcome. And then through the book, you're also exploring, am I a great investor? Has it been luck? What is the formula that you've put together? Which is a great part of the book's story, right? In terms of how did I get to where I've got to? What did I do along the journey? And you also talk about also making sure that I spent on the experiences, not just on the things. But now you've been able to amass some of the things as well, so your friends can come down to the beach house or whatever that looks like as well. So it's a brilliant story. I want to tap into when did you really know that this is what you wanted to do? Because we get a lot of people who've reached out in our business.
Career or the investing?
Career first. And well, you made it. You made your career your personal investing. Like, in other words, if I follow the story right, you had an interest in basically self-discovery. You had an interest in this whole concept of, if it is to be, it's up to me. You've put the effort in terms of educating yourself, and then you've executed on that education, both for the business that you served at the time that you served them, but also yourself personally. And that's enormous. Like, you know what I mean? Like, this magnification has occurred because of your actions and what you've done on the journey. And now you're sharing that wisdom and knowledge.
Sounds to me like you're talking about someone else.
No, but I'm not. I'm sitting next to someone who's doing amazing things.
I tell you why it was so easy, because I loved what I did.
It was natural.
It was perfectly natural.
Yeah.
I was eager to learn, and that makes it easy.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, one of the reasons that I wanted to chat to you, to our audience, is because your book, the Ulysses Contract, came across my desk, and I started to flick through it, and the sub headline is how to never worry about the share market again, right? So we're the property couch, and so we don't focus too much on shares, although we are pro shares, and to be clear, we are pro shares. But this book isn't a tactical book about the share market. This
No.
book is a strategic, philosophical, evergreen headspace book, right? So I wanted. Here's a couple of things. When I've gone through the book, you're very widely read. We've talked about that before. It's got great common sense in this book. And what was the because and you pick that up, you don't think it's a finance book, right? Like I said to my son yesterday, do you know that book that I've been reading? I'm going to meet the author and chat to him on the podcast, and he goes, "Oh, do you mean the Useless Contract?" Right, and I'm thinking, there's my 10-year-old trying to read, something that I didn't even know the word before. So can you give us a bit of background on what it is and why you use it as the metaphor for a finance book?
Sure. It's based on a very, very old poem written by Homer, again before Christ. That's how old the poem is. And it's a lengthy story, but there's part of the story that I've tapped into, and it's the part of the story that most people will have heard of, is when the king of Ithaca, a guy who's called Ulysses, was coming back after the Trojan Wars. He was sailing across the sea around southern Europe, and he was heading back to Greece, to Ithaca. And he was sailing past an island that was inhabited by Sirens. These are these mythological women who sang beautifully and lured sailors onto the rocks, and they smashed up their ships and to their death. And he asked the sailors, his crew, to put wax in their ears so they wouldn't be tempted to row the boat onto the rocks. But he wanted to hear the sirens, so he asked his men to tie him to the mast and leave the wax out of his ears. And it's a story about putting something into place before you get exposed to a temptation to stop you from falling prey to that temptation. And I thought it was a beautiful analogy to the stock market, because we embark on this journey of investing. And along the way, there are a lot of sounds and songs and sirens and temptations that you're going to be exposed to take you away from doing the right thing. So I talk about the financial sirens that you are likely to be exposed to. Some of them are obvious, many aren't. Some are internal, and some are half-baked or non-truths that will be presented to you as fact. And they're the really dangerous ones, and they're the ones I talk about in my book. And how what you can do to stop yourself falling prey to all of this, to stay on the journey, so to speak.
Yeah, it's a wonderful metaphor. Ben and I were chatting about it before we push record, but do you remember when you stumbled across that as the epiphany, that was going to be what you'd write this book about? Because I think it's really clever. You've got this wonderful metaphor that applies equally to property as it does to the share market, around what are all these temptations that you will be faced with, that if you are tempted by them, you will smash into those rocks. I think it's a wonderful metaphor. Do you remember?
Yeah, I do. It's sort of a reverse thing, because for years I've had an exploring mind, an inquiring mind, I should say, and I've wanted to understand what is going on out there in terms of, can I believe this stuff I'm being told? Can I believe it? So I was, inquiring about this stuff, reading about it. It's, as I like to say, dragging and kicking through a sieve of logic to see whether it was actually logical. And then I came across the term, the Ulysses Contract, probably only about 5 years ago, and I thought, wow, that is essentially what applies to what I've been doing for the last 30 years. And so that I'd always wanted from that point in time to write a book about that fact. And I started writing it, I should say, during lockdown. And as you're well aware, Melbourne was the most locked down city in the world. It gave me 2 years of utter pleasure writing the book.
Now you talk about in the book, and you're just mentioning those external factors and those internal factors, and you're making assessments around those. Which one in your mind is the more powerful one? Which one carries the most gravitas in terms of the biggest risk for you? Is it the internal mindset belief and those barriers, or is it more of the temptations and the external that's pulling you or pushing you into that sort of story?
They're all dangerous, all of them. But I think the internal ones, I mean, we don't think particularly straight. We're not, you know, homicus rationalis, as the economists would like us to believe. We do some pretty dumb things. We do dumb things around money. And I think unless you're aware of those things and, you know, what you should do to prevent yourself, it was Ben Graham, the famous Ben Graham, the Warren Buffett's mentor, who said that the most, you know, dangerous thing is ourselves when it comes to investing, and our beliefs and our misbeliefs. So yeah, I think they're the really dangerous ones.
So I guess I get the pronunciation. Ulysses.
Ulysses.
So the Ulysses Contract, as you write in the book, is free.
Odysseus if you're actually if you're Greek. Ulysses if you're Italian.
Okay.
So his actual name was Odysseus, hence the Odyssey.
Okay.
A long journey.
Ulysses.
Ulysses.
There we go.
You know, I got to tell you, once you get your tongue around it, you'll be fine.
Well, as my 10-year-old, I'll make sure I don't stumble into that one. But freely made decision that is designed and intended to bind oneself to a specific action in the future, right?
Correct.
Clearly, it's a promise you make now to stop doing something stupid in the. I'm quoting you here. Promise you make to make sure you don't do something stupid in the future.
Yep.
So, and you said there's two payoffs. You're happier because you've resolved the immediate inner conflict.
Yep.
And two, by denying yourself a lesser reward now, you receive a bigger reward later, i.e. the marshmallow test, or studying now instead of watching TV. So how important is that for people to make this contract for themselves when it comes to investing?
Depends how influenced you are by this stuff, but extremely important. Extremely important. I have a sort of a hypothetical type mask that I talk about when I talk about people listening to economists. I mean, I don't know if you've read Dan Gardner's book, Future Babble. It really got me thinking about economic predictions made by economists. And I thought, you know, I mean, the perfect example, and I think I mentioned in my book, I wrote it a while ago, is Ben Bernanke in 2007. I mean, the most well-known economist in the world at the time, the chairman of the Federal Reserve. And he was being interviewed in 2007 about the economy. He said, well, it's great, it's strong. You know, it was only a few months later that they went into an 18-month recession, the worst economic downturn they'd had since 1929, and 1930 really. And then when the property market was getting crunched towards the end of 2007, they asked him again. They said, well, look, the property market's not looking really healthy, and what happens if it crashes? And he basically said, Ben Bernanke said, well, I don't buy your premise. You know, property markets don't crash. Well, look what happened with subprime. And then when it did crash, he was asked again, what's this going to do to the stock market? Nothing. It's different than the stock market. Well, the market crashed 50%. And we had the worst global financial crisis since 1929, 1930. Now, this is one of the world's most preeminent economists, so it really got me thinking. And I started exploring the work of Philip Tetlock. He's a professor at Yale University, and he's an expert on expert predictions. And his famous study, he had, I think it was 285 odd forecasters, and he looked at what their predictions were and then followed them through time, because no one ever bothers to check whether their predictions come true or not. We just accept it at the time. And Tetlock found of all those people making political and economic forecasts, there were 27,400 odd forecasts he looked at. And they were worse than a monkey throwing darts. Tossing a coin would have done better. And he found, and this was what I found so interesting, the economists who were the worst at predicting were the most confident ones. Mm-hmm. Now, who do we hear from in life? We hear from the really confident ones, because people seek confident forecasts. If a forecaster is asked what's going to happen with interest rates, they go, oh, I don't know, they could go up. They could go down. No, they want someone to say, they're going to rise, they're going to do this, they're going to do that. Because I don't know if you've heard of a guy called Alfred Cowles. He was the founder of the Cowles Institute into economic research, and in the 1930s, he died in 1984 by the way, but he was an old man, but in the 1930s, he looked into this whole issue and he said, why do people look for economic forecasts when we find time and time and time again that they're useless? And Cowles, I think, was quite correct. He said, a world in which no one knows is frightening. We don't know, so we look to someone who does know. Now, they don't know either, but they pretend that they know. They've either fooled themselves or, I don't know, maybe their job depends on it. I don't know, but we keep looking to forecasters even though their forecasts are absolutely useless. Now, what's my mast? How do I tie myself to the mast? Because even I'm tempted sometimes to listen to them, and I'll guarantee I could tell that to you, and still next week if an economist comes on TV, you go, oh, is that going to really? Oh, I'm worried. Yeah. Really, is the bad? No.
You've got a human behaviour just like the rest of us do.
I always say the best thing you can do, and this is my mast with economic forecasters, is when an economic forecaster comes on TV, use the time constructively. Go and make yourself a cup of tea.
But they have to do their jobs. Like ultimately, the money markets.
But people believe them.
I get that. But how do you not run a money market system? Like you were talking before we came on air that you had to. When you're running short-term money markets, you've got to pick a trend. And I've just finished the quants book myself, so it's quite interesting in terms of obviously they're trying to find those arbitrage using speed and technology and math and effectively programming. But the point there is that...
Did you see the program, sorry to interrupt,
no, right.
Mark Zander? Did you see that Mark Zander? He's an economist in the US, and he'd spent 20 years building an econometric model to forecast the economy, and he fed in over 1,000 inputs, everything from employment to interest rates to the oil price, over 1,000 inputs into this thing, 20 years to build it, computer driven. And he was asked, and how's it going? He said, oh, it's useless.
Yeah, macro's hard.
It's useless.
It's super hard. most of the macroeconomists will say we're basically trying to get a trend rather than anything else.
So you know how they come up, how they resolve that one? Speak with true confidence and hope that not too many people like Philip Tetlock are actually checking the outcomes, because if they did, you'd be out of a job. The problem with forecasting is this, as far as I can see, is that how is history delivered as a narrative? It's delivered as a narrative. How is history delivered? It's a story, it's a narrative, it happened. So you can deliver history as a narrative. How are forecasts delivered? They're delivered as a narrative as well. They set their story. This is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. And people get really mixed up when they hear history, which is fact, and the future, which is total fiction. Who knows? They start to sound the same. And that is... people believe narratives over statistics. I just gave you those figures about Philip Tetlock. 27,400 odd, all a waste of time, predictions. People go, oh yeah, that's just a number. But when there's an economist next week delivering a narrative on the future of the economy, they'll sit up and listen.
Well, we see it firsthand. I mean, I'm on record as saying a couple of times, you're either wrong or lucky, right? When you make any type of predictions. I mean, we saw. Do
you remember John Kenneth Galbraith's great quote? He was a financial historian. He said, "There's two types of forecasters: those who don't know and those who don't know that they don't know." Remember that one? I thought it was an absolute beauty.
But it comes back to the property. We saw that property prices were going to correct themselves by 20-25% in this recent cycle. And it's been 9%, and now we see CBA
for the last two.
And we saw it during 17-18 when we thought there was going to be a 20%. So these economists from the banks, and it's lit up everywhere in the media in terms of what's going to happen to property prices. But now CBA and now also Westpac are now saying property prices are going to grow this year. But they didn't expect the interest rate rise that
So
we just
why are
saw
we
on
listening to
Tuesday.
that? Why are we, as Warren Buffett said, if an organisation has one economist, then they've got one employee too many. I mean, do we really need them? Oh, sorry.
No, that's all right.
Sorry.
Well, but that's budgeting, that's forecast, whatever that looks like.
Look, I will be really cynical here, really cynical, if you'll allow me. I think a lot of it has to do with marketing. I think if a bank or an organisation or anyone can put someone out there on a pedestal, I think it's marketing. So, call me a cynic.
Well, news organisations are businesses. They're selling advertising. They've got to have eyeballs there, so it all kind of makes sense. Because there's 12 sirens that you've highlighted. You're talking about siren number 5 in the book, the soothsayer siren, the expert forecaster. A couple of interesting things you said in that particular chapter that I want to get your feedback on. Understand that investing is the art of making definitive calls in an uncertain world. And you don't need to make predictions or embrace those of others in order to invest successfully.
No, you don't.
I think that's super refreshing for people to hear. And I guess for our community that's listening to this, we're encouraging them to buy property. We're encouraging them to expand their time horizon to decades, not years. And we're encouraging them to do the very thing that you said. We haven't as sort of succinctly as you. We're encouraging them to go and make a cup of tea when they're hearing stories of
property is an extremely long-term investment.
Yes.
I mean, have you guys heard of SPIVA? I mean, we're talking about the share market here, share price index versus active managers. Have you read that stuff?
Percentage. Yep.
You were talking about, and the reason I'm picking up on this is you said that investors can make a plan and invest without being of the pinstripe suit set, right? Okay, you don't need to have a career in finance to know what you're doing. You just need a basic education. And that education can be relatively straightforward. You need to understand what you're investing in. But getting onto SPIVA, share price index versus active managers is research done by S&P. Okay, and they have found repeatedly, and it doesn't matter what time frame you have to look at. I think they've been doing this for about 20 odd years now. Over any 5-year period, the active managers, the so-called professionals, underperform the index they're trying to beat. 80% of them underperform it. Now you might well say, well, if I'm going to invest in give my money to an active investor, professional active investor to invest on my behalf, I'll choose one of the other 20%. But it's not a podium of winners. It's a revolving door. You'll find that in the next period, the 20% who outshone is different than the 20% the time before, which means it's more indicative of chance. These fund managers, I hate to say it, I'm sorry, but they're not outperforming the market. They're getting market returns, and the reason that they're getting lower than market returns as an investor is because of the high fees they charge. 1.5%. And that's why if you give your money to they will hate me for saying this. You know, they've probably got voodoo dolls of me and sticking pins in them. But it doesn't take great brain power to invest in an index fund, a broad-based index fund that invests in the broader index to get returns that are as good as the active managers are going to give you. And that's why a basic education, your average Joe who bothers to read some fundamental books about investing, can become very good at it. I'm not going to comment on the property market because that's not my area of expertise.
But Mike, when you were starting out and you were dabbling in buying...
I know where this is going. I love it.
Because you and I can sit back after 30 or 40 years of doing this.
Yeah, I love it.
Right, and Bryce at that point too. But you didn't start off that way,
did you?
That's
exactly what I knew you were going to ask. I love it. You're right. You're dead right. I came out of the blocks. I was going to beat the market. Watch this. How simple is this? I just have to learn a bit about accounting and mathematics, and I'll don the suit and put on my tie and watch me go. Whew. No, that didn't happen. Look, there's that classic comment that, you know, it takes years and years and years of experience to actually appreciate how simple investing can be. And beating the market is possible, but it's not me, and it's no one I've met, although I've very briefly met Warren Buffett. But he's been off his game for 15 years. I think Berkshire Hathaway has become so big, and he's going to be 93 this year, by the way. So, Jim Simons has taken the mantle as the best investor in the world. He's more a trader than an investor. But you need to find market inefficiencies that other people struggle to find, and truly consistent, exceptional capability to beat the market is a very rare beast.
And the bigger you get, that's why it's so much harder.
Yeah.
Because you've got to find more and more of those opportunities.
Yeah, as
to get that consistent
Buffett says, when I go
return.
looking for a company now, I carry an elephant gun, and they don't come along too often. He has to invest hundreds of, we have to invest tens of billions of dollars to move the dial.
Yeah.
And most good investments he just has to let go because they're so insignificant. But the skill that it takes to beat the market is not endowed in every fund manager. And sorry, I hate to say that again, but it's true. No. I was an active investor, and our fund actually, we didn't have a fund, but we did track our performance. We actually did outperform the market. But I can't sit here and put my hand on my heart and guarantee that we outperformed the market through any of my skill. I can't say that. We did, but how can I be so confident of that? I just can't. Truly great investors are a very, very rare breed, very rare breed. And I think it's better just to make yourself safe. Don't do anything stupid. You can learn how to do that. And I talk about that in the final chapter of my book.
You do, because sorry, I was going to say, just how many years did it take you to work that out for yourself?
About 35 years before I came to that epiphany.
Mine was about 15 to 20.
I'm a slow learner. No, slow learner.
No, I know the feeling.
Well, I think that's an important part. That in the space of a weekend, you can get the experience of someone who's been doing it for 35 years, where it's been distilled into. Because the way the book's structured is beautiful, right? At the beginning, it's very negative, right? I'd have to say at the beginning. Here's 12 sirens. The one now, two later, the believing what isn't so, the buyer siren, the crowd siren, the soothsayer siren, the market timing, the painting pretty patterns, the stock picking, the pinstripe suit, the tech stock, the day trading, the high returns. So you've gone and through a wide range of literature, for a wide range of research, you've actually just gone and pretty much myth busted all of those ways that you can outperform. And then so the conclusion is, you can't outperform, so why bother? And you've even gone to the point where, okay, everyone hangs their hat on the fact that you've got these titans. So you say, if you want a gaining edge, it's a combination of speed and process. And a part of process, there's, well, if you think that you can be Warren Buffett.
Process is finding market inefficiencies.
Yeah, well, and you talk about, well, if you're Warren Buffett, okay, but here's a whole range of personal traits that he has that are uncommon. So if you have those, okay, tick, no problem. So the point is that you then go, well, okay, well, what is my financial mast moving forward? And there's some truisms here that I think there's worth us touching on. But I guess first one is be realistic, and that's really an extension of that, isn't it? Be realistic about what you can achieve.
Realistic about your returns. Know yourself. Be realistic about what you can achieve. Just getting back to what you're saying before, and it jogged my memory about my trips to Omaha, because I really did a deep dive on what makes Warren Buffett tick. I went there 5 times. As you say, I lectured there at the Value Investing Conference. And I had the extreme pleasure of meeting his daughter, Susie, 3 times. Once to talk to, the other times I was just in a room when she was talking. And someone in the room asked, what 2 words best describe your father? And she said, she didn't even hesitate, she said integrity and patience. Patience. Now everyone look at the success he's been and they go, wow, I want a piece of that action. They don't realise how long it took him to get there. The greatest force behind Warren Buffett, I mean, he had extraordinary returns when he had his initial partnership. He was out of the blocks at 26 and until the age of 39. So he had 13 years as a partnership, and his annual geometric returns were 30% You can imagine that for a stock investor. It's huge.
Massive.
Considering the long-term average is around about 10. When you compound that, it's phenomenal. And then he got head of Berkshire Hathaway in 1965, so he's been CEO ever since. But his greatest force has been compounding.
Yeah.
People forget that.
Yeah.
Right? Just
99% of his wealth is after his 50th birthday.
You look at Berkshire Hathaway Class A shares. I haven't looked at their price recently because I sold mine, but it hasn't paid a dividend since 1972. All the profits, and it's a very profitable company, just get fed back, and the share price has gone, something silly. As I said, I haven't looked recently. It was probably up around $500,000 a share.
Well, I remember
it was about $9 when he, got
Correct.
on board.
And I think they've still got, and again, don't quote me on this, but it's about 80 billion in cash.
Yeah.
That's not actually invested at the moment. So
that's a drag on returns considering the interest rate he's been getting on treasuries. Treasuries are
well, he's waiting for the opportunity.
He's waiting for the opportunities.
That's the patience story, right?
Yeah,
in terms of
he only makes about one investment a year.
Yeah.
He hasn't got a computer on his desk.
Yes.
Does not have a computer.
And he reads a lot.
Well, that's what he does.
Yeah.
He used to read about 5 books a day.
Yeah.
Used to.
Wow.
Slowed down now.
Speed reader. So I guess the master, you've got be realistic, diversify, reversion to the mean.
Yeah.
I think that's something we've touched on.
Well, let's talk about interest rates because it's a very topical discussion with the Reserve Bank lifting interest rates 11 times since last May.
Well,
let's talk about it.
Now 12.
Well, I think it's 11, isn't it? Was it 10? Now it's 11.
No.
This week's the 12th.
It's the 12th one, is it?
Yeah.
Okay. Geez, I must have been asleep one of those ones. I mean, here we go with interest rates. Most young people in Australia aren't aware of the history of interest rates. When I was in financial markets, I remember in January 1990, interest rates were 17.5%, the overnight cash rate, and it dropped to 0.1 until May of last year. So it dropped from 17.5 down to 0.1, and that's people's experience of interest rates. They just fall. But I've been reading an interesting book recently by a guy called Edward Chancellor, who's a financial historian, English financial historian. He wrote that great book, Devil Take the Hindmost. I don't know if you've read it.
No, I haven't read that one.
Anyway, he's talking about the history of interest rates. And the thing that people don't realise, who have lived since 1990 to now, we have lived in both the highest interest rates in history and the lowest, and he goes back nearly 5 millennia. So this is not normal what's been going on recently. It's not normal. So anyone who dived in and bought property, and took out a 1.8, 1.9% mortgage, getting back to your answer, a question I should say, mean reversion, it's not normal for interest rates on a mortgage to be 1.8%. The pendulum swings, and it's swinging. And to think that interest rates are high at the moment, they're 3.85 after today?
Correct.
Right?
Yep.
If they think that's high, you wait, baby. I mean, the long-term mean is around about 5%. That's pretty normal. So I think anyone who judges interest rates from what's been going on since 1990, they need to expand their horizon a bit.
Yeah, just for clarity, you think the cash rate long term is 5%?
I'm not making predictions.
When you quoted that 5%, was that the cash rate or what we pay as consumers with the 5% that you just mentioned?
Yeah.
Because it's important to note, because a lot of people, because we've done the modelling from 1990 since the Reserve Bank was made independent and so forth.
Yep.
And that was, we did that model. It moved to around 7.25, but in the last, obviously 5 years with cheaper interest rates, it's come down to around that sort of 5.5, 6.
Yep.
So the regression to the mean story is exactly that.
Yep.
So we've always done our models based on our clients.
Trouble is with the regression to the mean, you can't put a time frame on it. That's the problem.
Yeah.
It's just that, and I think the only time regression to the mean works is when things are totally out of whack, one way or the other, because they can fiddle around in the middle, left and right and up and down all over the joint. Like, I can remember in 1990 I was working, where was I working then? Potter Warburg. I remember talking to one of the bond salesmen, and I said, mate, interest rates are going to come off. He said, what are you talking about? I said, well, have a look at the overnight cash rate. I mean, this historically is crazy, 17.5%. He literally, I remember he told me, he said, you're on drugs, mate. You're on drugs. What do you mean interest rates are going to fall? Well, I didn't have any ability to predict. I just knew that they were so out of whack. And the same, 18 months ago when they hit 0.1, I was going, oh my goodness me, they are going to climb.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people that didn't think they would, because people judge the future by what's going on in the present. That's one of the greatest mistakes people make. No, get yourself an horizon that could be 100, 200, 300. I mean, the perfect example, you guys love property. The study by P.D. Schultz of Maastricht University, the Dutch study, the study in Amsterdam on Herengracht, which is the Gentleman's Canal. I'm sure you've read it.
No, not that one.
You haven't?
I haven't read
Please
that one.
do.
Okay.
If you're into property, P.D. Schultz, I think it was 1972 or 73, he's a professor at Maastricht University. And what he did, and I love this study, we're onto property now. How's that? You didn't think you'd be talking about property with me. I love this study. Amsterdam was expanding in the early 17th century. It was a very, very profitable country. They're making a lot of money from the Dutch East India Company, which was, Amsterdam was a powerhouse of economic activity in the early 1700s. And Amsterdam was expanding beyond the city wall. So they established new communities on canals. When you go to Amsterdam now, it's the city of canals. Mm-hmm. Most of those houses were built in the early to middle 17th century. And the beautiful thing about P.D. Schultz's study is it was a pure study on real estate, because A, the properties that were built then are still there and selling and so forth. Secondly, the demographic was the same, middle to upper income earners. So that can affect property prices when, an area becomes gentrified. This wasn't becoming gentrified at all. It was the same people buying the houses. Thirdly, the houses were little to not unchanged. Sure, they got plumbing and they got electricity. And finally, the Dutch keep fantastic records on property. So P.D. Schultz had a pure study of property going back to the early 1600s to 1970 of buys and sells. He could work out what had happened to property prices.
The CAGR.
Where else have you heard a study like this? Guess how much they had risen in price over that period on a compounded geometric rate compared to inflation?
Compared to inflation? 3 to 4%?
0.2.
0.2?
0.2. 0.2 over that time. Now, if you compound that for the period of time that he was looking at, which was like 300 years, effectively the purchase price was twice in real-time terms, which isn't that good an indication, because from 1855 to 1955, anyone who owned one of those properties, so a 100-year period, anyone who'd owned that property for 100 years on a inflation-adjusted, a real return, had made zip in 100 years. That to me is a pure play property study that I'd pay far more attention to than what's been going on in Australia for the last 30 years.
Interesting.
What's been driving prices? I'm in Australia. I mean, the fact that interest rates have gone from 17.5 to 0.1, what are houses about? They're about affordability. It pushes up price if everyone can bid with the same amount of borrowed money. I know there are other factors like, immigration, supply and demand. All those issues are very, very important.
Still the income.
But affordability. If the bank's prepared to lend you $1 million because interest rates are 1.5%, it's very different if they were 13%, wouldn't they? But my first house was 13.5.
That's right.
Anyway,
so, but that's
read the study.
That's part of the key argument that we have. That ultimately over the long term, it's about the scarcity of the land and the income and the ability of the people to afford it.
Yeah.
So if you get exclusive land and you get people continuing to put extra value on top of that land, that's ultimately where that exclusivity is. So there's obviously plenty of studies around the world where you're looking at the base income of the middle class and then the lower middle class. So they'll be price takers. The price makers will ultimately still be those people who can afford to spend, 30 million, 40 million on an exclusive property, and then it trickles down from that. So if you've got a situation in a society where the 25 to maybe 35% of that society is actually getting above average incomes, they're the ones who will ultimately move the dial based on servicing calculators and based on their ability to borrow. And that will ultimately determine, and that's why the land closer to the city locations is the most expensive.
Or close to the beach.
Yeah, or close to the beach because of that exclusivity. But if you're talking about buying property that's just general run-of-the-mill around everywhere, you're just going to be a price taker. Like ultimately over 20, 30, 40 years. In Australia, our studies are about 50 years long, that's around sort of 6%. And if you look at the RBA research and a lot of the pricing research, for that last 50 odd years, it's been about 6.5% sort of compounding return. That's with inflation. That's not adjusted for inflation taken out of it.
The other thing also is anticipated change in use of that property. I'll give you a good example.
Use. Yeah.
When I was 25, I bought a property in a nice area. I was 27 years old. I paid 147 grand for it. That place sold a couple of years ago for 4 million. Now you might well say, well, a new house built on it. Yeah, I did, but guess what? They're bulldozing my house. Its land value, 4 million.
There you go.
Now, 10% compounded over that period pulls in the 147 to the 4 million. This, over a time, inflation was running around about 3%. 7% real, but why? Because I had to pay 13.5% and someone else could have bought that property at, 2% at the time. That's what drove the price. Plus another factor, they've rezoned the area to, you can build, medium density.
And productive use.
Yeah,
So
because it was near a shopping centre and train station.
Yeah, we did a recent episode on all of this stuff in terms of the sustainable long-term drivers. And it's well, our evidence suggests that, you're looking at productive use, scarcity of that land and its proximity to lifestyle drivers. But you've got to have a group of people who can afford to buy it. And what we are definitely also seeing is a disparity, thanks to the power of compound, of basically wealthier people getting wealthier. That transition of that wealth going down to the next generation.
I've had this discussion before, and I feel that the current millennials are getting cheated because they unfortunately have grown up through that economic period. Now I hear people going, oh, they're eating avocado on toast and they're not saving money. And back in my day, I went without.
Oh, that's definitely harder for them.
I struggle with that
definitely
concept.
Harder for them.
Because I've just told you that sort of at age 27, I was able to buy a house. There is no way known that my kids could have afforded that house.
In that location.
Today.
Yeah.
Today.
Yep.
So I feel for them.
Yeah.
And I'm. This is a call to arms, you baby boomers out there. If you can afford to, help your kids out. I don't think.
Mum and dad.
I've got no problem with that. None.
So one of the
We went off on a tangent then, didn't we?
well, just to bring it back. So in terms of the master, the last thing before we get to the actual contract. So investing is about farms, not casinos. So again, a couple of quotes from you. Too often investing is confused with gambling. Investing should never be likened to a visit to the casino. Rather, it should be viewed as a process of building a financial farm. Treat your portfolios like farmers treat their farms. Farmers rarely sell their farms or buy new ones. Nor do they base a decision, and I like this one, nor do they base a decision on whether to buy a farm or sell one they already own on next week's weather outlook.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, well, that's what they do in the stock market, isn't it? Traders.
Yeah, well, anyone who's listening to the soothsayers, right?
Speculators, yeah.
So that leads us to the final part, right? So the Ulysses contract. I know I've mucked it up.
Ulysses.
Ulysses.
Look, stand in front of the mirror and
Ulysses.
say it 100 times tonight, you'll be
Ulysses,
fine.
Ulysses.
A couple of podcasts ago, I couldn't say, what was a disciplinary. I could not get it out.
You nailed it.
But I nailed it that time. But yeah, so I'll help Bryce with Ulysses.
Yeah. So Ulysses. So we've got a mandated Ulysses contract in
superannuation.
Superannuation.
Yep.
So what is, in the time that we've got here, what do you recommend the Ulysses contract?
Ulysses.
What do you think that people listening to this, how should they take this to heart?
Okay, well, great. You mentioned early on that a lot of the start of the book is negative. The reason it is I think you become wiser.
You're myth busting.
If you dispense with mistruths. Okay, if you can get rid of them, you're going to be a wiser person. So let's eject all the stuff that doesn't work, and let's focus on the stuff that does work and commit to it. And don't listen to all that stuff that doesn't work for the next 30 years. You can commit to a plan today that will ultimately deliver you that financial farm that will deliver you the annual harvest in the form of dividends. But you have to commit to it. So you have to understand that you are tying yourself to the mast for 30 years. Mm-hmm. And you work out how much you can save without destroying your lifestyle. I mean, you don't have to wear a hair shirt. You know, you've got to live, enjoy yourself. But work out how much you can save. No doubt it's going to rise because you will get, you know, promotions, or your business will take off or something. So you can actually change that figure. Work out how much you can save without destroying your life. Commit to saving it regularly. It's almost like dollar cost averaging. Mm-hmm. Commit to it. Ignore all the noise because it's all going to work out. I can remember when I was about 30, I sat down at my desk at home, my home study, and worked out what I could be worth one day, knowing what I could save. And I kid you not, I mentioned this in the book, I actually thought that at a compounding rate of 7% real, which is what the share market typically delivers. I wasn't trying to outstrip market returns, just standard returns. And I did not believe the figure it spat out at the end. I thought I'd made a mistake. I checked my maths again and I thought, oh God, this is going to be so easy to stick to this one.
Power compound.
Yeah, and I did. In fact, it ended up better because I ended up getting returns that were better than I thought I was going to get.
So most people have mandated super, but that's not catch-all because self-employed, for example, miss that catch-all. Yeah. But so is your plan for most people to have their super, make extra contributions so that they can...
as long as it's a good super plan.
Yeah.
You know, it's not one of the old ones that's ripping you off blind. I mean, make sure that the fees are low.
Yeah, so passive, low fees, dollar cost averaging, get extra contributions. What happens when in your mind, if they've got the employer guarantee, they've got their own contributions, and that's maxed out? Do they then buy it in their own name, or
I had that problem. I loved that problem.
Yeah,
you put in the lowest tax environment you can create within Australian tax laws. It's that simple. And that will be, you need to talk to a good accountant about this. Look, accountants aren't necessarily the people to turn to for financial advice. They may be, but not always, often not. But they're certainly the ones you should turn to for tax advice. And it's just a simple rule that, I mean, superannuation is the best tax environment. I get tired of people who say, oh, super's no good because it's not performing. It's not that the super isn't performing, it's that your super isn't performing. It's the investment principles that are driving your super. There is no better tax environment than superannuation. And then once you're maxed out on that, and what a wonderful problem to have, then you look at the next tax environment that is the best tax environment. It might be to invest in your spouse's name, if you have a spouse who's not working. And is going to continue on in that situation for years to come. You don't want them to land a job as a CEO of a major corp next week. But if it may be a personal one in a loved one, your wife or husband. It may be in a trust structure. It may be in a company structure. But just the lowest that you can legitimately have. It's that simple.
Well, congratulations, Mike. I think the book is a terrific read. I want to encourage all of our community to get their hands on it. We'll put some link in the show notes for them to get that. I think just the breadth and the depth of knowledge that you've shared applies equally to... It applies to investing.
It's the same principles.
It applies to investing, and I think that the principles are timeless. I think they're evergreen. And I think that, as I said before, people over a weekend can get the benefits of 35 years of your learning. And I think, to your point earlier, where you said that if you have an appreciation of history, that means that you can stop putting yourself in a situation where you think that you can outperform the market. You can just get on with building a financial farm. So,
you know what I was saying there, sorry to interrupt, but what history does for you, what it's done for me, when the markets start misbehaving, they're only doing the same as what they've been doing for the last 400 plus years. And because I've read about every boom and bust that's been going on for the last 400 years, in fact longer than that. I was reading. I mean, the perfect example is Tiberius, Emperor Tiberius of the Roman Empire. He flooded his economy with money when there was a financial crisis, and I thought this is exactly what they did in the wake of the GFC, and this was happening over 2,000 years ago. But with a feeling for history, with an appreciation of history, when you hit those stormy waters, which is what you invariably will do, I like to say it feels like I'm watching a film that I've never seen before, but I know exactly how it's going to end, and it gives you a remarkable sense of comfort to know that. You don't get fearful.
We've been challenged with that recently. Like Bryce and I have been talking to friends and family, and also, you know, feedback through when times are difficult, people, they get wobbly.
Yeah.
They get wobbly.
They start to doubt themselves.
They do. And I think, you know, one of the messages for me, Mike, around that is the more that we can tell people to play the long game, stay the long term, stay invested, don't panic and get out, and just let the markets re-establish themselves and reorganise themselves, you know, albeit that you're not going to be in, you know, a
I
country
see times
that
like
crashes.
that as a time of opportunity.
Of course. Yeah.
There's nothing I like better than to invest in the wake of a crash.
Be greedy when others are fearful, and fearful when
It's
others
just
are
a
greedy.
wonderful, wonderful experience.
Well, you say history is a grounder, it's an anchor, it's a mast to tie yourself to. I think that's a great place to leave this conversation. Okay. Mike, thanks for joining us on the Property Couch.
Okay, thanks for having me.
Well, there you go, Ben. We covered a lot. Here's what I took away from that conversation. You've got someone who is deeply passionate about, first of all, investing, and secondly, about his preferred vehicle of choice, which is the share market, right? And that was great. And in our journey over a long period of time, I've experienced that the shares people vehemently defend shares, and the property people do exactly the same thing. So what I found nice about that conversation is it wasn't a property versus shares, it was an investing paradigm. But here's the thing, that after 35 years, having someone who's been in the arena, tried all sorts of things in the game, and then came to a conclusion that synthesized conclusion was regular savings, well, we say regular surplus, have an investment plan, and don't get caught up in unbridled consumption. I mean, the parallels between the messages are just really frank, I think.
Well, building on that, he also said that the money buys him experiences, which is his measure of happiness. That sounds very familiar to us as well. You know, for me, it just works through the noise, but it's lessons that he's also learnt, right? Like I touched on it when we were talking on the couch with him, but my big takeaway is consistent with what I've done. I could see myself through Mike. I traded shares when I was 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, through that earlier stage, and it was frustrating and not being in control. And, you know, BHP had a record production period, but their share price went down. You sort of just didn't know what you didn't know. And so I then pivoted to obviously looking at different alternatives in terms of how I could make that money work. And my vehicle has been property, as it has been with you, Bryce. And so for me, that's the main message here, is that the takeaways from what Mike is telling you is, and what our vision of this podcast and our community is, there's some pots that if you touch, you will get burnt. And so don't touch those pots. We talk about it here in terms of high rise, high density, house and land type stuff, lots of vacant lands, no scarcity, all those types of things. Mike talks about it in the sense that synthesize into simple investment vehicles that just over the long term bring in those results. And I think that's my big takeaway from that. And, you know, in terms of that interesting study that he referred to in regards to Amsterdam and the long-term performance of only 0.2, it is clear, and I talked to this with Mike about the fact that there was restrictions on that market. So even though the analysis that was done, there was clear restrictions on that particular market, in the fact that height restrictions, and also in the fact that there was restrictions in terms of what you could do to those buildings. So the moment you bring restrictive regulation in, you limit its productive use. And when you limit something's productive use, you don't allow it to achieve its ultimate capital growth. So that is a reminder for obviously the episodes that we always take deep dives into this stuff, and that is that when you get market interference, even though it was said, it was an original condition, nothing had happened to it, there were still restrictions in those particular markets. So it is important to note that not each land parcel is made, they're unique. They can be unique, and there's a premium. And especially if you get that productive use through rezoning or less restrictions, you're also able to potentially make value out of that land through the improvements that you put on top of it. So as much as it's always great to be a student of that stuff, and I love it when new information's on me and it makes me critically think through my processes again. So I did that, since that particular chat with Mike. And so again, I can always be grateful when I have those types of exchanges to digest them, think about them, and then basically bring a broader conclusion around what's happening in that particular situation. And that was my conclusion, that basically there was limits in terms of how high you could build, and ultimately there was limits in regards to what you could do to the actual infrastructure itself. So productive use falls away, and as soon as it falls away, its scarcity value is diminished, and that limits its capital growth.
Yeah, and iron sharpens iron. So we got to get in a room with someone who's clearly passionate, and we all have our biases too, Ben, because
Yes, we do.
Property benefiting from low interest rate environment. Well, if households feel wealthier, they spend more money, which the companies also benefit from as well in the results. But I think the conclusion is simple, right? Here's what we hope from having a conversation with Mike, is that you observed that as you and I have invested for a long period of time, and it's served our families wonderfully well. It's serving our clients wonderfully well. Mike has also been investing for a long period of time. We have different vehicles of choice as our primary investment vehicle. But here's interesting, right? You and I have shares, but our primary is property. Mike's primary is the share market, but he also has a significant property portfolio, which we didn't touch on to any extent, but he talks about that in his book as well. So thank you, Mike, for coming on. Hopefully the key takeaways that we wanted from that message, folks, is investing is a good thing. Investing with a long-term horizon is a good thing. Investing with some basic mast principles, so that you tie yourself to the mast and make sure that you don't hear those siren songs on the island. I love the metaphor. So we're grateful that Mike came and shared his wisdom on the podcast, and he's certainly.
And there's details in the show descriptions. You can get access to learning more about his book. Do yourself a favor, get out there. If you're a student of this stuff, you get that knowledge. You get that 35 years that's synthesized into his approach. And of course, it's been very successful for him. So they're the key takeaways. Don't touch those hot pots. And he and I have traded shares, and we've touched those hot pots. And we also have other assets, like, he's got commercial property that, if he had his time over again, he said he wouldn't necessarily partake. But that's how it goes. And you can't make every post a winner. Ultimately, every prediction is also going to be challenged as well as that. So make a formula, stick to it, and play the long game. Is a nice little takeaway there.
Well, you kind of at a fork in the road too, aren't you, Ben? Because everyone has a decision. If they decide to get into the arena of investing, you've got one path where you go, I actually think I can outperform the people who've been doing this for a long time. And then you get into the arena and you go and spend a decade or a decade and a half or 2 decades, and then you go, actually I can't. And then you end up defaulting back to the timeless principles of staying long term, buying good assets. Or you can actually just go, why don't I just, because, to his point, he'd made all the mistakes early, and then now his decision, what he would do if he's talking to his 20-year-old self would be different now. So that's the hope of this podcast, that people can listen to it and go, these guys have actually done this before. I've invested in brand new properties. I've been involved in the spruiker side of things. We've seen it. So you can choose the path, or you can go and try and find out for yourself, and hopefully don't lose a decade.
And waste a decade.
Yeah, which you can never get back. So there you go. All right, my life hack today, Ben, is Microsoft. I use a Mac. You use a PC. You and I have had all these argy-bargies about which is better over time. Who cares, right? It still gets the job done. But Microsoft Outlook have released for Mac a little feature that I really like, Ben. I had a quick look to see if it's for PC, and I couldn't find it. But basically, it's got profiles in Mac, right? So now you can create a profile. So you have a global profile, then you can have a work profile, then you can have a home profile, and I have a third profile, which is my newsletter profile. So what does that mean? Well, all of my Empower Wealth emails, I can click the work profile, and it will, in Outlook, it'll turn everything else off. I'll only see calendar items. I'll only see emails. But then when I want to, what I was doing is I was going into a second email software, Apple Mail, and using all of my other. Now I've brought it all into Microsoft, because then I can click on the second profile, which is personal. So it gets rid of all the Empower Wealth stuff, gets rid of all my newsletter stuff, and just lets me focus on the personal.
Well, that's a great productivity hack.
And then I can click on the newsletter one, because I subscribe to a million newsletters, Ben, and I don't want them clogging up my other inboxes. But sometimes I just want to go through and read them all. So then I can click on that, and it gets rid of the other two profiles, all within the same software on my laptop, on my desktop, and it's only a recent update. For definitely for Mac. I couldn't work out if it was PC, Ben, so that's why I'm trying to just throw it out there for the PC users. But it has been wonderful. It has been a super important part of me dissecting and focusing on the right things at the right time. So for the Mac people, check it out. For the PC people, check it out to see if it's available to you. You have to update to the latest Outlook to see if it's there. But we'll put some details in the show notes on the link to the blog page, so you can check that out. So that's my life hack today, Ben. Focus. Got to get the focus.
It's a ripper. It's an absolute ripper.
Hopefully it comes your way soon. All right, mate, that's my life hack for today. What's making property news?
Mate, there's heaps of property news out there, but obviously for the benefit of moving quickly through time, let's cover off on a couple of big ones. The first one is what happened in Cairns. The Cairns Council. We mentioned this probably a few months ago, how they were going to charge rate holders higher rates if you had an investment property. Well, what a dumb idea. What a stupid idea. Guess what? They've got out of the sun, they've cooled themselves off, they've had a cold shower, and they've worked out that was a dumb idea, and now they've withdrawn that. So no longer will it be a case of chronic rental shortages in Cairns because all the investors got out there, and higher rents for those who live in a transient, beautiful part of the world called Cairns. So that is good news for property investors who own properties in Cairns. And if there's any other councils out there thinking that this is a good idea at this time, think again. It's terrible timing, and it ultimately means that renters are going to pay more because the costs will be passed on to them. So take note of that, please, all other council members. Now, the other big news, of course, was the RBA's decision. Now, we had basically a thesis price that talked about the cash rate being at 3.6, and that's where we felt that the property market would then lift its head through that because of the low supply but high demand. We've definitely seen that play out in regards to, in my economic and RBA update, I talked through the growth that we're seeing in most cities around the country. Well, it's very clear that the RBA doesn't like the property market growing at this particular time because it's inflationary. So we saw the RBA move the cash rate to 385. That will have a sentiment impact, and it will certainly see more broadly, generally speaking, that there will be some markets that will start to soften off. That said, remember, there are markets within markets. And what we were talking with Mike today about, always make sure that you're playing the long game. So I listened to the economic update from CBA this morning, got a good brief in terms of their read on that. And ultimately, the chief economist for CBA is saying that the cash rate, they think this is it. The only way in which there will be further rate rises from this point forward is if we keep spending and we keep having that supply side demand kicking through. So we do have to tighten our belts, everyone. I don't care if you've got really nice savings. Please keep those savings in your offset account. This is not the time that we want you spending. I've been saying it for 6 months. Hopefully people start listening, because that will be a risk on the upside to higher interest rates, as is a strong property market. They do not like, CPI has made up 25% of the property market in terms of rent and also construction costs and also price rises. So it's really important that, broadly speaking, that the property market remains flat for the next sort of 6 to 8 months. And so we may then expect to see interest rates stay a little bit higher for longer as part of this, sort of cooling or tightening cycle that we're seeing the RBA play out with at the moment.
Yeah, we did talk about what would happen to the property market, and it seems to be playing out that way, Ben. But it is the pesky what's the right word, pesky little thing that's affecting the RBA, because there's other things that employment and a few other things.
Employment's too strong. The economy's too strong, and people, most people, they're like the bottom 25% of the population, Bryce, mate, this is hard for them. This is really hurting. It's obviously hurting renters. But yeah, in the affluent area, we're still seeing record spending on luxury items. So that's not slowing them down. And that normally happens throughout the course of a correction in a cycle. But it's the middle class. It's this big middle piece, sort of from 25 to 75%, the two middle quartiles that are still got a lot of money in their bank savings accounts because they were basically living at home for 2 years and not spending. Well, that money is still being spent. So higher airfares, holidays, accommodation, leisure type activity. So that discretionary spending is still too high, and those service industries are maximising and capitalising on that. So we do need to get that service demand side inflation down.
And of course, folks, we've got the budget next week, so perhaps the interest rates have given the federal government a nice little out clause as to why they don't have to inject so much into the economy because of the inflationary impacts that'll have. But fair bit to cover. We'll obviously cover that next week. But Ben, a big show today. We're certainly hopeful that the community has heard the message of the investing principles. Thanks again to Mike for coming, mate. Until next week.
Knowledge is empowering, Bryce. And guess what? If you also watch in the show notes there, I've got a description there in terms of a little demo video on the expense dashboard in the new Moorr mobile app. So knowledge is empowering, but only if you act on it. So go and watch that video. See if you like it. If you like it, download the app.
Like it. See you next week, folks.